I spent 31 years reading blueprints. I know how a structure is supposed to hold weight. I know which beams carry the load and which ones are purely decorative, put there to look strong, not to be strong. You can tap on a wall and hear the difference if you know what you're listening for. Hollow sounds hollow. Solid sounds solid. The problem is, when it's your own house, you stop tapping. You just assume everything is holding. I stopped tapping a long time ago. My name is Walter, and I'm 64 years old. I spent the better part of my adult life as a structural engineer for a firm in Charlotte, North Carolina. I retired at 62 with a pension, a paid-off house in Belmont, and what I genuinely believed, was a family that loved me. I had a son named Derek, 36, who worked in sales and had never quite figured out how to work as hard as he talked. I had a daughter-in-law named Renee, who had figured out very precisely how to spend money she didn't earn, and I had a grandson named Cooper, 7 years old, who was the only person in that house who hugged me like he meant it. My wife, Margaret, passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer, stage 4. 18 months from diagnosis to the end. After she was gone, the house in Belmont got very quiet. Derek and Renee lived 40 minutes away, in a neighborhood with a homeowners association and a community pool that they had somehow convinced me to help finance. They had needed a down payment. I had written the check. That was year 1 of retirement. Year 2. Derek's company downsized, and he needed to cover the gap in salary while he figured out his next move. I wrote another check. Year 3. Renee decided she wanted to open a boutique. I don't need to tell you how that ended. Another check. By the time I reached year 4, I had given them just under $90,000 and told myself each time that this was what family did, that Margaret would have done the same. What I did not tell myself, what I deliberately chose not to hear, was the hollow sound when I tapped. I should have been listening. The morning it all changed was a Saturday in October. I had gotten up early, the way I always do, made coffee, and sat on the back porch, watching the light come up over the tree line. Cooper was coming that weekend, just him, not his parents, because Derek and Renee were going to Asheville for what Renee had described in her text as a much-needed reset. She had typed it with a little leaf emoji. I remember thinking about that leaf emoji for longer than I should have. A much-needed reset. From what? Exactly. Derek hadn't worked a full week in 3 months. Renee's boutique had closed 16 months earlier. What they needed resetting from was a mystery to me. But I said nothing. I told them to enjoy themselves, and I looked forward to having Cooper. They dropped him off at 7 in the morning, both of them in sunglasses. Renee, holding a coffee cup that I recognized from my own kitchen cabinet. The ceramic one Margaret had bought at a craft fair in Asheville. The last trip we ever took together. I noticed it. I didn't say anything about it. "We'll be back Sunday night," Derek said from the driver's window. He didn't get out of the car. He didn't come inside. He said it like he was leaving a package. I spent Saturday with Cooper. We built a birdhouse in the garage from a kit I'd been saving. We ate grilled cheese for lunch and watched an old movie in the afternoon. That evening he fell asleep on the couch with his head on my arm, and I sat there for an hour without moving so I wouldn't wake him. That is the last calm memory I have from that weekend. Around 9 o'clock Saturday night, after Cooper was in the guest room, I felt it. I have heard people describe it in different ways. Some say it's like an elephant sitting on their chest. Some say a tightening, a squeezing. For me, it felt like someone had reached through my sternum with a cold hand and was slowly closing their fist around something that was not supposed to be grabbed. I sat down on the kitchen floor because the chair seemed too far away. I knew what it was. I have always known my family history. My father died of a heart attack at 67. His brother at 61. I had been careful, or I thought I had been. But bodies don't consult your plans. I was able to get to my phone on the counter. I called 911, unlocked the front door, and then sat back down on the kitchen floor and waited. I remember looking at the refrigerator while I waited. There was a drawing Cooper had made the summer before, a yellow house. 4 figures out front, stick arms raised like they were happy. He had written Grandpa in his handwriting, under the tallest figure. I looked at that drawing until I heard the sirens. The paramedics were good. They were fast and they talked to me the whole time, and I could tell by the way they looked at each other that it was serious. At the hospital, they told me I had experienced what they called a significant cardiac event, a blockage. They needed to operate. Before they took me back, a nurse, young woman, kind eyes, name tag, said Patricia, asked me if there was anyone I wanted her to call. I gave her Derek's number. What Patricia told me later, when I was in recovery, is that she called Derek's phone at 10:47 that night. He answered on the third ring. She explained the situation clearly. His father had suffered a serious cardiac event, had been taken into emergency surgery, and the next few hours were critical. She told him the name of the hospital and the address. She asked if he could come, what Derek said, and Patricia repeated it to me, word for word, because she said in 12 years of nursing, she had never forgotten a call like that one. What Derek said was, "We're in Asheville. That's 2 hours away. Can this wait until morning?" Patricia told him it could not wait until morning. She told him this was serious. Derek said, "Look, we're in the middle of something. Can you call us if something actually happens?" She told him something was already happening. He said, "Okay, yeah, we'll figure it out." And then he hung up. Patricia stood there with the phone in her hand for a moment. Then she went back to work, because there was work to do. And some things cannot be processed in the middle of a shift. I was in surgery for 4 hours. I woke up alone. Cooper was safe. A neighbor I trusted had come over when I called her before the ambulance arrived. A woman named Ruth, who had lived next door for 20 years and who brought me soup every winter without being asked. Ruth stayed with Cooper through the night and told him in the morning that Grandpa had gotten a little sick but was getting better. She is 71 years old, and she moved faster to help me than my own son did from 40 minutes away. I spent the first day in recovery, drifting in and out. On the second day, I was more alert, and I asked Patricia if my son had called the hospital. She looked at her screen and then back at me. She nodded. He had called once, mid-morning, and asked for an update. He had not come in. On the third day, my son and daughter-in-law arrived. It was 2 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Alder Tapter and 79. They came through the door of my room, and Renee was wearing a new sweater I had not seen before, cream-colored, the kind that costs more than it looks like it should. Derek came in first and stood at the foot of my bed and said, "Dad, you scared us." I looked at him for a long moment. "I scared you," I said. "We came as soon as we could get away." The traffic on 85 was, "Derek," I said, "you were called Saturday night." He started to say something about how they had been in the middle of a trip, how they hadn't wanted to overreact, how Patricia had said I was stable. I let him talk. Renee stood behind his shoulder and did not look directly at me. She had her phone in her hand. When Derek finished, I said, "How's Cooper?" He said Cooper was fine. Ruth had dropped him at home Sunday. Everything was fine. I said, "Good. Thank you for coming." And I looked out the window. They stayed for 40 minutes. Renee asked if there was anything I needed, and I said no. Derek told me the doctor said I'd need some recovery time and that they could work something out for the next few weeks. He said it the way people say they'll help you move and then text you the day of with an excuse. I knew exactly what work something out meant. I nodded and said it sounded good. They left. When Patricia came in for evening rounds, I asked if she could help me borrow a phone charger. Mine had died. She brought one in, and she also sat down next to my bed, which surprised me. She said, "Mr. Walter, I need to tell you something, and I'm telling you as someone who's been doing this a long time." She hesitated. Then she told me what I already knew, and also what I didn't. What I already knew. The call on Saturday night. Derek's response. The single follow-up call the next morning. What I didn't know. That when she had told Derek on Saturday night that this could be his last chance to get there, he had said, and she remembered this precisely, "He's tough. He'll be fine." And then he had ended the call. He'll be fine. I lay in that hospital bed for 3 more days. I had a lot of time to think. I thought about 31 years reading blueprints. I thought about the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade. I thought about $90,000. I thought about a ceramic coffee cup that belonged to Margaret. I thought about a 7-year-old boy who had written Grandpa under a stick figure with his arms raised like he was happy. And I thought about my attorney, a man named Gerald, who had been my friend since our sons were in Little League together. I called Gerald on the 4th morning. I want you to understand something. I am not an angry man by nature. I have never been someone who acts from rage. What I felt in that hospital bed was not hot. It was very, very cold. The way a blueprint is cold. Precise. Line by line. No room for sentiment. I had spent 4 days looking at the structure of my life clearly for the first time in years. And I could see exactly where the weight was being carried and exactly where the facade was. And I made decisions the way I had always made decisions. Methodically, without flinching. Gerald came to the hospital on the 5th day. He sat in the chair next to my bed for 2 hours. He's a good man. He didn't tell me I was being too hasty. He didn't tell me to sleep on it. He listened, asked questions, and took notes. I told him what I wanted. I want you to understand that I had been careful with money my whole life. Margaret and I had lived modestly, saved consistently, invested quietly. What Derek and Renee knew about the checks, the down payment, the boutique was a fraction of what actually existed. I had never mentioned the investment accounts, the rental property in Gastonia, the portfolio managed through a firm in Charlotte that my father's accountant had helped me set up in my 40s. Derek knew the surface. He did not know the structure. The second thing Gerald told me was that the rental property was still fully in my name, as was the primary account. The joint account I had kept for convenience, the one Derek had a card on that one needed addressing first. I addressed it from my hospital bed, with Gerald's help, on day 5. By the time I was discharged on day 7, the joint account held exactly $412, which represented the balance of a small, recurring payment that I had not yet redirected. Everything else had been moved. The card Derek carried was connected to nothing. I did not cancel it. I simply ensured that when it was swiped, it would return a polite decline. Ruth picked me up from the hospital. She brought a thermos of chicken soup and drove me home in her Buick, talking about her garden the whole way, which was exactly what I needed. At home, I moved carefully. The doctors had given me clear restrictions and I followed them. Gerald continued working. I want to be accurate here. What Gerald uncovered in the weeks that followed was not something I had expected, and it changed the nature of things considerably. 2 years earlier, Derek had asked me for my signature on what he described as a co-signer form for a small business loan for a consulting project he was exploring. I had signed it. I had been trusting. What Gerald discovered when he pulled the actual paperwork was that the form had been for something more than I understood, and that Derek had used my name in documentation for a second application I had never seen. There were records. There were timestamps. Gerald brought in a colleague who specialized in this area. A quiet woman named Miss Park, who wore small gold earrings and spoke with the precision of someone who had done this many times. I won't detail every conversation Gerald and Miss Park had with the relevant institutions, because some of it is still personal. What I will tell you is that Derek had believed, for reasons I will never fully understand, that I would not look carefully, that I would not go back through the paperwork, that I was the kind of man who signed things and moved on. He had misjudged what kind of man I am. Gerald filed the relevant complaints in November. The process moved more quickly than I expected. Derek received a notice before Thanksgiving. Renee called me twice that week. I let both calls go to voicemail. Her message on the second call was long. She said that things had been misunderstood, that Derek had always meant well, that I had to know how much they loved me, that I wouldn't do this to family. Her voice broke near the end. I listened to both messages fully. Then I saved them, as Gerald had asked me to. In the meantime, I had made changes to my estate documents. This was something I had been meaning to do for years and had not done out of I'll say it plainly, sentimental reluctance. That reluctance was gone. Gerald walked me through everything. Cooper's interests were protected through a structure that did not root through his parents. That was the most important thing to me. Whatever happened between Derek and me, Cooper would be okay. I made sure of that first. By December, I had moved out of the house in Belmont. This was a decision that surprised people. Gerald raised an eyebrow. Ruth expressed concern. That house had been mine and Margaret's. And after Margaret was gone, it had become a place where I waited for phone calls that didn't come and wrote checks that didn't help anyone. I had a standing relationship with a property management firm that had handled the Gastonia rental for years. They helped me identify a smaller place, a condo in a quiet development near Concord, 40 minutes from Belmont in the other direction. Ground floor, accessible, easy to maintain, a back patio that faced a small pond. I moved in on December 14th. I did not tell Derek and Renee. I left nothing behind in the Belmont house except the furniture, which I transferred to a consignment firm, and one thing on the kitchen counter, an envelope addressed to Derek. Inside was a single page. It said, "I spent 31 years making sure structures were sound. I should have applied that to closer things. The accounts you know about have been closed. The card has been inactive since November 3rd. Gerald has all documentation related to the loan matter and will be in contact with your attorney. Cooper's college fund is intact and will remain so. He has done nothing wrong. I'm not writing this in anger. I'm writing it the way I would write a final structural report. Clearly. Completely. And with no intention of revising it. I hope you think about the night of October 12th for the rest of your life. Not because I want you to suffer, but because I want you to understand what it means when someone needed you, and you said, "He'll be fine," and went back to your evening. I know the difference between a load-bearing wall and a facade. I should have known which one you were sooner. Dad. They came to the house the third week of December. I know this because Ruth called me. She saw Derek's car in the driveway and then, 20 minutes later, saw it still in the driveway with no one moving inside for a long time. She called me to ask if I was okay. I told her I was sitting on my patio watching a family of geese on the pond. She said she was glad. What happened after the letter is not something I was present for, so I can only tell you what I know from Gerald and from the process that followed in the new year. Derek retained an attorney. There were meetings. The documentation Miss Park had assembled was complete and was not seriously contested. The outcome involved restitution in terms I am not at liberty to describe in full, except to say that Derek's financial situation in the spring looked considerably different from his financial situation the previous fall. Renee filed for divorce in February. I don't say that with satisfaction. I say it because it happened. Cooper's school sent me his winter art project in the mail. Ruth had given them my new address when the school called, looking for an emergency contact update. It was a drawing, crayon on construction paper, a pond, some birds, a small figure on a patio. He had written underneath it, "This is Grandpa at his new house." In his handwriting, still working out the letters. I framed it. It hangs next to the window that looks out at the water. I am not going to tell you I am happy in the way I was happy when Margaret was alive. That would not be accurate. And I have spent too much of my life letting inaccurate things stand. What I will tell you is that I am clear. I sleep through the night. I drink my coffee on the patio in the morning, and I watch the light come up, and I do not feel the particular weight I used to carry, the one that comes from holding a structure together that was never meant to hold. I have a cardiologist now who I see every 6 weeks. A man about my age who asks how I'm doing and actually listens to the answer. I walk 2 miles every morning. Doctor's orders, along the path that circles the pond. I have started eating better than I have in years because I am cooking for myself, and I find that I enjoy it. Ruth visits on alternating Sundays. Gerald and I have lunch once a month. In place, an Alestine, on Creases for Mun. And every other Saturday, I pick up Cooper from a neutral location agreed upon through the family court arrangement. We spend the day together. We are working on a bigger birdhouse now, one with 4 separate compartments, because Cooper decided that bird families should not have to share one room. He explained this to me with great seriousness while we were sorting hardware in the garage, and I agreed with him completely. Last Saturday, he looked up from the wood he was sanding and said, "Grandpa, are you sad?" I thought about that for a moment. I sanded a rough edge smooth. "No," I said. "I'm just quiet." He seemed to accept that. He went back to his work. I know the difference between quiet and empty. Quiet is what's left when you've finally set something down that was too heavy to carry. Empty is what you feel when you never had anything worth carrying to begin with. I am not empty. I never was. I had Margaret for 26 years, and I had Cooper from the moment he arrived. And I have Ruth next door who calls me when she sees something unusual in my driveway. And I have Gerald who spent 2 hours in a hospital chair asking the right questions. What I no longer have is a load I was never supposed to be carrying alone. What I no longer have is a facade I kept mistaking for a wall. Some structures, when you strip away what was never holding weight to begin with, turn out to be stronger than you thought. The load was just in the wrong place. Redistribute it. Rebuild from what's sound. That's not a metaphor. That is engineering. And after 64 years, I am finally building something that will hold.